Hey, we're back. That's right. You just enjoyed some great commercial segments. Hopefully, they weren't hijacked by any other frequencies. We'll find out when we post this video. But this is Star Power. This is Tony Stevens rejoining you with my buddy, my good buddy, the Ghost Man McClay, John McClay, the Sex Appeal. And we're here to talk to you today about Image Comics, something that I think both of us are pretty passionate about because as artists, we appreciate artists. And Image Comics was, as we all know, founded by artists, disgruntled artists. I don't know if you know this or not, John, but I think that the godfather of that movement was really Todd McFarlane.
Oh yeah, Todd McFarlane spearheaded the whole movement. He kind of went around and recruited some people, and he thought that would be like-minded, and there were 7 of them by the end of it, like that left Marvel at first.
I know that it took him a lot to convince Jim Lee to get on board, because at the time Jim Lee was doing really well with Chris Claremont on his run with the X-Men. He was being recognized very well for his work. But that doesn't mean necessarily that Todd McFarlane's opinions on it and how they were being paid and respected was necessarily wrong. I think that he had some good points on that, and the reasons why he had for starting Image Comics really shifted the dynamic of how the comic book industry was working at that time.
Yeah, and I think that McFarlane must have convinced Lee so well, because Lee would go on to pull in Waltz Portasio, who didn't end up becoming one of the partners, I don't think, but he was a part of that initial 7.
He was a part of what really made it boom, because they just had the good young names at that time, the hot artists that were making an impact in all the industries. So even with somebody who was young and very uneducated in art, such as Rob Liefeld, he got him on board.
He became the CEO of Image for a while.
Correct. And so Rob Liefeld was a big deal over there. But I think that young blood mentality, no pun intended, was a big reason why Image Comics became so big right there in the early 90s. I remember going to my local comic shop, and when I saw the first issue of Spawn, I was like, oh, that kind of looks like Spider-Man, and Batman had a demon child baby. And in essence, it was, because that's what Todd McFarlane puts out. It's kind of like a Batman Spider-Man combo. A lot of the essence of his take on Venom, when he had helped create Venom for the Spider-Man comics, was present there between the longer jaw that was on the Violator, and you can remember that on Venom when he was a bad guy. The living suit, all sorts of things about it was very reminiscent.
Yeah, he just pushed it. All the limitations when he was working at Marvel were gone. And so he just pushed the envelope, more exaggeration, more detail, whatever he thought of, he could do, and he didn't have to answer anyone but himself.
Yeah.
So then you get stuff like, like here's the, let me pop up that issue of Spawn so people can see it. You weren't seeing stuff like this at that time. This is the coloring looks so painterly. I remember when I first saw this, I was blown away by the colors. The first 3 issues had kind of coloring that was like this.
I remember even at the end of each comic, if I remember correctly, Todd McFarlane would actually put in alternate covers or alternate artwork for Spawn. So
little inserts, yeah.
Right, yeah. So all the other artists that worked over there at Image would take their hand at drawing his character, and he would put those huge blowout pages at the end of the issue. So when you bought a Spawn comic, you weren't just buying this story that was penned by Todd McFarlane. You also got this extra artwork, and it was, like you said, I agree with you. It was very colorful. It was very bright. The blending patterns were excellent. When you have a whole company run by artists, I think the aesthetic appeal is what's really going to be pushed. And
the art, they had that down. But they didn't all have a business sense about them.
No.
And so that kind of
I
course,
think Rob Liefeld bought cars for his assistants when he got really rich at that point in time.
And
He's
it
like,
wasn't like
oh yeah,
sustainable, like, well,
no,
like, there was deadlines that weren't met. And so because of that, like, so, if you're a comic book retailer or reseller, you order like issue 2 based on how well issue 1 sold, right?
right,
And so like issue 1 sold like 1 billion copies. And I'm not being specific about the numbers here. I'm just using 1 and 2 as examples. But so issue 2, you order like 1 billion copies of them, right?
right.
But then if it's delayed for like weeks or months, that interest in the subject matter kind of wanes in fans. And
Yeah,
so it
you want
doesn't
to
end
get
up
people
selling
while
as
they're in
much.
it.
Yeah. And so like, you want to strike while the iron's hot. And so those delays, I think, really ended up hurting them early on. And like, so like within a year, they realized there was a problem and they
Well,
hired a new guy.
I think that
Hmm?
Todd McFarlane had a good idea of it. I know that when a lot of those artists were with Marvel, Marvel understood what they were doing.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
for example, Rob Liefeld was hot new. He was doing the X-Force comic. Well, he started in New Mutants at the end of New Mutants, and then it turned into X-Force. He premiered as a character, and Marvel went ahead over to their, I think Toy Biz was the people that were doing their toys at the time, and they said, okay, let's go ahead and make 100 cable figures right now. People will buy them all. And that's how they ran things. Merchandising, production, everything was run like a clockwork machine
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
the interest of the public. Whereas when Liefeld started, and if I remember, his issues were actually Youngblood, correct?
Rob Liefeld, yes, that was his. So like, let me skip to that little image here, and you can see the initial 7 images here, 7 creators. Like so, you got Waltz Portasio here, Mark Silvestri,
Mark's
Eric Larson, yeah, and his, Jim Lee right over here in the corner, Jim Valentino, of course, Todd McFarlane, Spawn, and then Youngblood right there. It's Robbie Boy,
But
and
see, now, and I do remember that Image was releasing toys. Todd McFarlane was a huge proponent for pushing the toy production because he understood that merchandising aspect. And that was a lot of what he was mad about over at Marvel was, hey, if I draw a picture, you slap it on a T-shirt, I'm not getting paid for every single T-shirt that gets sold. So when he was at Image, he was like, hey, I'm going to make my own T-shirts. I'm going to make my own toys. I'm going to make this merchandising happen and work
mhm.
in my favor. So I do remember that like Youngblood had some action figures that were released, Wetworks.
There were some early Spawn figures prior to like the kind that we know nowadays. They were more like traditional, like a Toy Biz look to
Oh
them, like
yeah,
more.
they
And I
had the
remember
basic
those.
potions, but it was
Yeah, yeah.
they were great. Even my grandma knows because she likes and watches the show, and so should your grandma. But she didn't understand what I was talking about. She was like, what do you want for Christmas? I said, I want the new Spawn figure, or I want medieval Spawn, or I want Ninja Spawn. And she didn't really understand what she was getting me, and she'd get it for me. And when I opened it at Christmas, I was super happy. And she was like, are you sure? It's not quite the prettiest thing I've ever seen. It's like, that's because he's undead and he sold his soul to the devil, Grandma. And she's like, well, if it makes you happy, sweetheart. And it was like, that's all I need. Um, but he was really good at pushing out those products. And I do know that they also had a Wildcats run, which was Jim Lee and Brandon Choi. They had the Wildcats comic, which a lot of those characters are folded into DC now. And I think that
Yeah,
they're actually going to
Wildstorm
start using
Productions.
them. Yeah.
Yeah,
So they folded into DC.
when they first
When Jim
started,
Lee became DC.
yeah, all those guys, the initial guys, had separate like production companies. There's Todd McFarlane Productions was Todd's, of course, and Extreme Studios was Rob's, and let's see, Top Cow, Mark Silvestri, Jim Valentino had one too. I didn't realize that. His
Yeah, I
Shadow
think that
line.
Valentino, he's actually still spearheading the whole thing, running most of the company, isn't he?
I don't know currently. If he is, he's doing a great job
I
because
think Valentino was the one that was still doing it, and he, of course, he's the one that ended up green lighting the Walking Dead.
yeah, The Walking Dead. There's a lot of like independent comics are really great coming out of Image now, or the past few years, like Saga, um, Walking Dead, and I think Invincible is another one, which I think has the animated series coming out soon.
Oh,
But
really?
mhm. And
I know that that was a pretty good. It was a pretty good run of comics, and I mean, honestly, for me, I guess just because of my age, the initial run of it is what becomes immortalized to me. Just from those famous characters such as Grifter, Spawn himself. You had over on what was it called, Cyber Force. They had that Rip Claw guy. It was
Yeah, that
basically
was
Leaf's Lobo.
Sylvester's project.
So they had a lot of great, very appealing things that when you went to the comic shop, you're like, I'm buying this based purely off of the cover. I have
Yeah.
no idea what I'm going to find in here or if there's any good source material. But man, oh man, it is some beautiful artwork and I'm buying it right now. And of course, some people bought Rob Liefeld's stuff too.
Yeah. And then after,
Stop poking at you. I know you like Rob Liefeld, man.
I appreciate some of his aesthetic, at least the older from his Marvel days. Not so much anymore, but there's still a little bit of that energy that I liked about Rob's old stuff. But yeah, like after like '93, I think they started bringing in more creative people like Sam Keith and
And Kirkman, of course,
yeah. What did Sam Keith do?
eventually.
Max. He did the Max. Dale Keown, Pitt. And if you want to talk about someone who could not meet a deadline, I think 4 issues came out in like 1 year. But
Yeah.
the art was spectacular. And now you pronounce his name differently than I've always thought it was pronounced. So maybe you can correct me on this. Is it Jay Lee? You always pronounce it like Jolly.
I say Jiley. I think
I
it's
always thought it was
Jai, but
Jay.
he could
Anyway, he
tell me
did
I'm wrong.
Hellshock.
It's his name.
Yeah.
He should,
Hellshock. And I
and then
remember when that came out.
let's just hashtag Jiley or Jiley and get him to correct us, and then sneak
How
him
do
into
you,
an
how do you
interview.
pronounce? I mean,
How do you pronounce his name?
I should have looked it up before I attempted to say his name.
Well, yeah, I mean,
But
but these guys, they went and they did their own thing. You thought they were going to be blackballed from the market from Marvel and DC, but they've come back. They've done more stuff. They've become the new top tier people. I mean, going from working as a gopher and a janitor at Marvel Studios, and then look at where Jim Lee is now. He's running things for DC Comics. He's just doing so well for himself. Now, a lot of that comes from his ability and a lot of hard work that he put into it. And from the one time I ever got to meet the fella and ask him a few questions, of course I sounded like a little nervous schoolgirl, but you know, the way he put it to me was, if it weren't for his father throwing away his comic books, he would never have been a great artist, because it took him drawing those stories for himself for him to get that fulfillment. And that really is actually what spurred him forward into becoming a great artist that he is today, and working as an underdog at Marvel until he was noticed and recognized. And now look at where he is, sitting on a throne over at DC. So I think that a lot of them did really well for themselves, that I don't think all of them had the long-sighted view to see when they started Image Comics, but Tom McFarlane really helped them out in that degree, in having a little bit more of that view, that business sense of what he thought he should be getting out of this career. So I really do think that he's like the godfather of it all, in my opinion. But
oh yeah, Image was started by him.
Yeah.
He's the reason Image exists. Like, no, I don't think anyone can deny that.
And I think looking at the fact that Spawn's still running strong, it's over 300 issues now. I mean, I know I had the first 157 issues consecutive. I've actually gifted to an old buddy of mine, just because his love for Spawn runs deep, and he deserved it. But just reading that comic for that long, it was really compelling in my opinion. I mean, Spawn was and still is one of my favorite things. I mean, he's on display here, so it's one of those characters that was compelling. But at that time, it was like, hey, what are we going to do with superheroes? They don't need capes anymore. What they need are guns, pouches, indiscriminate violence,
pouches,
women. You know, it was.
Those were all things that Marvel just would not accept. You know, we're not going to change. We're not. You can't draw Spider-Man that way. You can't give him pouches or guns. And McFarlane was like, why not? Like, you know, and so like apparently people wanted to see something that was different from what
Everybody
they
wanted
had.
pouches. I mean, the 90s needed pouches.
It did, it needed them. And so we must give credit where credit is due. Thank you to Rob Liefeld.
Liefeld and the pouch was a great thing. I mean, before then, you had Batman with the utility belt, which may or may not look like it actually holds stuff. And after Liefeld came along, you got Cable, who is covered in shoulder pads and pouches.
You get shoulder pads, you get pouches, you get those like kind of like wrist braces everywhere. Robot arms.
How many scars does one man need on his face?
Yeah, you get weird like kind of padded headgear, but like all that stuff is iconic now. It's interesting.
It is. I think it's become a great staple to the majority of what comic book history is, and I think that they will be remembered as much as Stan Lee or Jack Kirby, any of the greats of our time. So I'm really appreciative that they did that. Shout out to you, Todd McFarlane, Jim Lee, all the big guys, even you, Rob Liefeld. We love you. We appreciate everything that you did and giving us a childhood worth remembering. A lot of their artwork really great. Hopefully we're going to have a bunch of images show up here for you so you can check them out. Now, we're coming up on the end of this episode, but I appreciate everybody for coming in, joining us today, hearing our thoughts on Image Comics, and going ahead and hitting like and subscribe. Don't forget our Patreon over at TTP Patreon. We'll throw up another link right here for you. Join in, get in the contest, win yourself the free TTP mug package. And let's just go ahead and say that this is one of the greatest shows you've watched today. So thanks again for joining us. From me and John McClay, we love you, we appreciate you, and don't forget to go out and have a great life and love and appreciate everybody around you as well. TTP signing out. We're turning the page. Join us next time. This is Tony Stevens signing out.